The girl in a worn camo jacket and carrying an old cloth bag stepped past the front desk, and the whole office paused for a second, then burst into laughter. A staffer quipped, "You here for an interview or prepping for a sniper mission?" Another snorted, "She must think Def Corps is a barracks." But when someone jokingly scanned the faded QR code on her bag, the entire company's security system abruptly shifted into military override mode, and her name appeared with access clearance, higher than the department head. Ella Monroe, 22, stood in the glass-walled lobby of Def Corps, a high-tech security firm in downtown D.C. Her soft black hair hung loose, brushing the shoulders of her faded camo jacket, the kind you'd dig out of a bin at an army surplus store. Her jeans were plain, her boots scuffed, no trace of makeup on her face. She didn't look like she belonged in a place where people wore $1,000 suits and flash smartwatches that screamed status. The receptionist, a woman named Karen, with sharp red nails and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, leaned over the counter. "Is it Halloween today?" she asked, her voice carrying across the lobby. A few people nearby chuckled their heads, turning to size up Ella, who just shifted her bag's strap and kept walking her steps steady, like she was counting them in her head. The laughter followed her to the elevators. An intern named Tyler Lanky, with gelled hair and a tie he kept tugging at, whispered to his buddy, "Did she think this was a military base or something?" His friend, a guy named Josh, scrolling through his phone, didn't even look up. "Bet she's lost. Probably meant to apply at the gun range down the street." Ella pressed the elevator button. Her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't turn her head, didn't acknowledge the whispers. The head of IT, Greg, a guy with a perfectly trimmed beard and a coffee cup always in hand, glanced up from his laptop. Whatever he muttered, rolling his eyes. Probably just a weird fashion choice. But his tone had that edge, the kind that says, "You're out of place," and we all see it. As the elevator doors closed, Ella stood alone, her reflection faint in the polished metal. A woman in a sleek blazer clutching a leather planner had slipped in just before the doors shut. She gave Ella a quick once-over, her lips curling slightly. "You know they have a dress code here?" she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I could lend you something if you're struggling." Ella's fingers brushed the frayed edge of her bag, but she didn't look at the woman. "I'm good," she said, her voice soft but firm, like a door quietly clicking shut. The woman huffed, flipping open her planner as if Ella's response was an insult. The elevator dinged and Ella stepped out, leaving the woman's perfume lingering in the air like a judgment that didn't land. Ella's first day at Def Corps was supposed to be quiet. She'd been hired as a junior analyst, a role so low on the totem pole it barely registered in a company that prided itself on securing contracts with banks and defense firms. But the moment she walked in, she was a target. Her jacket, her bag, the way she didn't smile or chat like everyone else, it all marked her as different. By noon, she was eating alone in the cafeteria, her tray holding a plain turkey sandwich and a bottle of water. A group of analysts at the next table didn't bother keeping their voices down. If terrorists storm in, one said, a woman named Rachel with a designer scarf and a laugh like a hyena, she'll probably fight back with her mouse and keyboard. The table erupted, one guy nearly choking on his soda. Ella took a bite of her sandwich, her eyes fixed on the table, but her fingers tightened around her water bottle just for a moment. In the break room later that day, a senior analyst named Lisa with manicured nails and a habit of name-dropping clients spotted Ella refilling her water bottle. "Oh, honey," Lisa said, her voice loud enough to draw eyes that jackets giving survivalist chic. "Did you borrow it from your brother's hunting trip?" The room tittered, a few people hiding their smirks behind coffee mugs. Ella turned, capping her bottle with a soft click. "It keeps me warm," she said, her eyes meeting Lisa's for a brief second before she walked out. The room's laughter faltered, Lisa's smile tightening as she realized Ella's calm had somehow made her look small. Nobody said it, but the air shifted like a crack forming in glass. Tyler, the intern who'd been eyeing her bag, couldn't resist. He'd already posted a photo of it to his Instagram story, captioning it, "Vintage Trash Vibes." The bag was old cloth with frayed edges and a faded logo that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. As a joke, he pulled out his phone and scanned the faint QR code stitched into the side. He expected a dead link, maybe a discount code for army gear. Instead, his screen went black, then flashed red. Clearance level 5, DoD override. The cafeteria went quiet for a split second, forks pausing mid-air. Tyler laughed, nervous. "Probably a glitch," he said, but his hands were shaking as he shoved his phone back in his pocket. The IT director, Mark, a guy with a perpetual frown and a coffee stain on his tie, was standing nearby when the alert popped up on Tyler's phone. His eyes narrowed and he grabbed his radio, his voice low but sharp. "Security, get to the cafeteria." Now, two guards in black polos appeared, their radios crackling as they approached Ella's table. "Ma'am," one said, his hand resting on his belt, "we need to talk about that bag." Ella looked up, her face calm, no trace of fear. "It's a backup tag," my father added. She said, her voice soft but clear, like she was explaining something obvious. Back when he designed this system, the guards exchanged a glance. Mark's frown deepened and he snapped, "Check it." They ran the QR code through DEFCOR's internal database. The results came back in seconds. The code was linked to a military override protocol buried in the company's infrastructure, set up 4 years ago, when DEFCOR was still a startup. Ella's name was listed as an authorized user clearance, higher than Mark's, higher than anyone in the building. The guards stepped back, their hands dropping to their sides. Tyler, still clutching his phone, muttered, "No way." Mark didn't say anything, but his jaw clenched as he turned and walked away, leaving Ella to finish her lunch alone. "Hey, before we go any deeper into this, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like Ella's matter. They're about people who get judged but keep standing strong. Your support keeps these stories alive. All right, let's get back to what happened next." The next morning, Ella was back at her desk, a small cubicle tucked in a corner of the open plan office. Her computer was an older model, the kind nobody else wanted, with a keyboard that clicked too loud. She didn't complain. She just worked her fingers, moving steadily across the keys, her eyes focused on lines of code nobody else bothered to check. But the whispers didn't stop. People walked by, slowing down to glance at her screen, then at her jacket, which hung on the back of her chair. "She's probably writing a manifesto," Josh, the intern's friend, said under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. A few desks over, someone snickered. During a coffee run that afternoon, Ella stood in line at the office cafe, her hands in her pockets. A project manager named Claire, with a bob haircut and a habit of twirling her pearl necklace, stood behind her, talking loudly to a colleague. "I mean, look at her," Claire said, not even trying to be subtle. "Who shows up to a tech firm dressed like they're hiding in the woods? It's embarrassing." Ella's shoulders didn't move, but her hand paused as she reached for her wallet. She paid for her black coffee, no sugar, and turned to leave her eyes brushing past Claire's for a fraction of a second. "Keep the change," she said to the barista, her voice steady, but the air around her felt heavier, like she had left something unsaid that Claire would never understand. At a brainstorming session later that day, the team was packed into a glass-walled conference room, tossing around ideas for a new firewall. DEFCOR's servers handled sensitive data bank transactions, defense contracts, even some classified government projects. The pressure was on to stay ahead of hackers. Ella raised her hand, her voice cutting through the chatter. "What about a layered military mesh architecture?" she said. "It's adaptive, decentralized, hard to crack." The room went quiet, then burst into laughter. Rachel, the engineer with the diamond bracelet that sparkled under the fluorescent lights, snorted. "What is this Mission Impossible?" The CTO, Paul, a guy who checked his watch mid-sentence like he had somewhere better to be, frowned. That structure was outdated after the Iraq War. "Move on." Ella didn't argue. She just nodded, her pen scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. Her face stayed calm, but her shoulders were a little stiffer, her grip on the pen tighter. Tyler, still riding the high of his Instagram likes, grabbed a marker and wrote on the whiteboard, "Ella =, extremely lost, laughably ambitious." The room snickered again, phones clicking as people snapped photos to share on Slack. Ella kept writing, her eyes never lifting to the board. She didn't need to see it. She'd heard the laughter, felt the weight of every stare. After the meeting, Ella lingered in the conference room gathering her notes. A janitor, an older man with gray stubble and a quiet demeanor, was wiping down the whiteboard. He paused, looking at the words Tyler had written. "Kids these days," he muttered, shaking his head. "They don't know who they're messing with." Ella glanced at him, her expression unreadable, but her fingers slowed as she zipped her bag. The janitor met her eyes for a moment, then went back to cleaning, erasing Tyler's words with slow, deliberate strokes. Ella slung her bag over her shoulder and walked out the whiteboard, now blank, but the janitor's words hung in the air like a warning nobody else heard. That night, Ella stayed late. The office was mostly empty, just the hum of the AC and the faint glow of her monitor. She was digging through old code in DEFCOR's system lines nobody had touched in years. Her fingers paused over a file labeled Monroe_protocol. She opened it, her eyes scanning the screen. It was her father's work complex, elegant, a lattice of code that could reroute data faster than anything the company used now. She didn't smile, didn't react. She just saved the file and closed her laptop, her movements as quiet as the office around her. The next day, during a routine server check, Greg from IT noticed something odd. A log file buried deep in the system showed an unauthorized access attempt from the previous night. He traced it back to Ella's terminal. "What's she up to?" he muttered, pulling up her login records. They were clean, too clean like someone had scrubbed them. He called over Rachel, who leaned over his shoulder, her bracelet catching the light. "She's probably just poking around where she shouldn't," Rachel said, but her voice wavered. Greg didn't respond. He just stared at the screen, his coffee cup forgotten. A knot forming in his stomach as he realized the log file had a timestamp from 3A. Mem, when nobody else was in the building. 3 days later, the world turned upside down. It was mid-morning when the alarms went off. Every screen in the office flashed red, a warning blaring, system breach detected. A virus called Venom Grid had hit DEFCOR's servers. It wasn't some kid's malware. It was a military-grade codebase, the kind used in war games to simulate coordinated attacks. The company's new firewall, the one Paul had bragged about at the last board meeting, collapsed in under 2 minutes. People were shouting, unplugging cables, slamming keyboards. Paul was on his phone, his voice rising. "Fix it. Now." Rachel was typing frantically, her bracelet clinking against the desk. Tyler was just standing there, his phone forgotten in his hand. Ella didn't move from her cubicle. She opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. Nobody noticed her, nobody except Greg, who glanced over and saw lines of code scrolling on her screen. "What's she doing?" he muttered, but he didn't stop her. 40 seconds later, the alarm stopped. The screens flickered, then stabilized. A notification popped up on every monitor. Firewall prototype Monroe Lattice. The threat isolated. The office went silent. Paul's phone slipped from his hand, hitting the desk with a thud. Rachel's bracelet stopped clinking. That was her mesh thing. She whispered, her face pale. Greg looked at Ella, who was already closing her laptop, her expression unchanged. "Did she just save the company?" he asked, his voice barely audible. In the aftermath, the office buzzed with uneasy murmurs. Ella sat at her desk, sipping her coffee, while others huddled in corners, glancing her way. Paul called a meeting, but before it started, he pulled Mark aside, his voice low. "She shouldn't have access to that kind of code," he hissed. Mark nodded, his coffee stain more noticeable now. "I'll check her credentials again," he said, but his hands were unsteady as he typed. Across the room, Ella set her cup down, the ceramic clinking softly against the desk. She opened her laptop again, her fingers hovering over the keys, and for a moment her eyes flicked to a small photo tucked into her bag. A faded image of a man in uniform, his arm around a younger Ella, both smiling under a desert sun. The news spread fast. By lunch, people were whispering about the Monroe Lattice. Paul called an emergency meeting, his watch forgotten as he demanded answers. Who authorized that code? He snapped. Nobody answered. Ella sat at the back, her hands folded, her eyes on the table. Rachel, sitting across from her, kept glancing at her, then away, like she couldn't decide whether to apologize or hide. Tyler wasn't laughing anymore. His phone stayed in his pocket, his Instagram story untouched. The meeting ended with Paul storming out, muttering about protocol breaches. Ella just stood up, grabbed her bag, and left the room, her boots echoing in the silence. Later that afternoon, a junior coder named Sam, a quiet guy who usually kept to himself, approached Ella's cubicle. He held a printout of the Monroe Lattice code, his hands trembling slightly. I looked at it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's brilliant. Like next-level stuff. Where'd you learn this?" Ella looked up her pen, pausing mid-note. For a moment, her eyes softened, but she didn't smile. "My dad," she said, simply, then went back to her work. Sam stood there clutching the paper, his face a mix of awe and confusion. He walked away, the printout crinkled in his grip like he'd just seen something he'd never unsee. That weekend, DEFCOR held a team-building retreat at a fancy hotel outside the city. There were trust falls, catered lunches, and a tug-of-war game by the pool. Ella showed up in her usual camo jacket, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. When the tug-of-war started, she shrugged off her jacket to join in. As she reached for the rope, her shirt lifted slightly, revealing 3 jagged scars running from her shoulder to her lower back. The team went quiet, their hands pausing on the rope. Derek, a sales rep with a fake tan and a laugh that carried across the room, whispered, "That looks like a blade wound." Chris, the team leader with a smirk that never quite faded, leaned in. "Probably got those playing Call of Duty in VR." A few people laughed, but it was nervous, unsteady. During the retreat's dinner, Ella sat at the edge of a long table her plate barely touched. A group of executives at the other end, including Claire with her pearl necklace, were toasting to a new client deal. Claire raised her glass, her voice carrying. "To success and to keeping our image polished," she said, her eyes flicking toward Ella. The table laughed, glasses clinking. Ella's fork paused midair, then she set it down, her movements slow. She pushed her chair back, stood and walked to the balcony, her silhouette framed against the night sky. The laughter at the table faded, and Claire's necklace suddenly felt too tight around her throat. Monday morning, Ella was in the backup server room, a small space filled with the hum of cooling fans and the glow of screens. She was checking a terminal, her fingers moving over the keyboard with a rhythm that felt practiced, almost instinctive. When she spoke to log in, the voice security AI lit up. "Identify your call sign," it said. Ella hesitated, her fingers pausing. Then, in a low voice, she said, "Echo 22. The system beeped, scanned her fingerprint, her voice, and unlocked. The screen flashed, Deep Ops mode activated. A classified map appeared, Operation Silent Falcon, tracking illegal arms shipments near the Ukrainian border. In the corner in small text, Contingency Agent Echo 22 active. Victor, the head of data. Ops, a guy with a buzz cut and a scowl that could stop traffic, walked in just as the map loaded. His eyes widened, then narrowed. "What are you doing?" he shouted. Accessing military intel is a federal offense. Alarms blared, red lights flashing. 2 guards stormed in their radios, crackling. "Hands up." One barked. Ella didn't move. She looked at Victor, her voice steady. "If I don't go in, your men will die on the border." Victor's face turned red. "Call the FBI," he yelled. The guards stepped closer, their hands on their belts, but Ella's eyes didn't leave Victor's. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch. She just stood there, her presence filling the room. As the alarms wailed, a young tech named Mia, who'd been shadowing Victor, froze in the doorway. Her eyes darted between Ella and the screen, the map's red lines pulsing like a heartbeat. "Wait," Mia said, her voice shaking. That's live data. How does she have access?" Victor ignored her, but Mia stepped closer, her tablet clutched to her chest. Ella glanced at her just for a second, and something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, like Mia saw something nobody else did. Ella's fingers kept moving, rerouting data streams, her focus unbroken even as the guards shouted for her to step back. Before anyone could act, the building shook. A low, rhythmic thud grew louder, rattling the windows. People ran to the glass walls, looking up. A Black Hawk helicopter, its black paint gleaming, descended onto the rooftop. The insignia on its side was unmistakable, a classified DoD airborne unit. A military officer in full gear stepped out, megaphone in hand. "Deploying Agent Echo 22, this is an urgent directive," he shouted. The crowd parted, every eye turning to Ella. She stepped forward, her face like stone, and walked toward the helicopter. She didn't look back, didn't say a word. She climbed aboard, and the Black Hawk lifted off its blades, drowning out the stunned silence below. On the rooftop, as the helicopter's roar faded, Josh dropped his phone, the screen cracking on the concrete. He'd been filming thinking it'd be another viral moment. Now his hands shook and he didn't pick it up. Rachel stood frozen, her bracelet catching the sunlight, her face drained of color. She wasn't just an analyst," she whispered, her voice breaking. The crowd dispersed, some heading back inside, others staring at the sky as if Ella might reappear. The officer's megaphone lay on the ground, its cord tangled, a silent testament to the moment everything changed. The office exploded into chaos. Paul, the CTO, was stammering, his watch forgotten. "Who even hired that girl?" he demanded. HR scrambled to pull up her file, but every trace of Ella Monroe was gone, erased like she'd never existed. Rachel, still holding her coffee, whispered, "We," mocked a battlefield coordinator. That night, men in black suits arrived, confiscating every internal camera. By morning, a single email hit the IT department's inbox. "Don't try to find me. I never existed." 22. The next day, a hushed meeting took place in the boardroom. The executive sat in silence as a DoD representative, a woman in a crisp suit, reviewed the incident. She didn't mention Ella by name, but her words were sharp. "Someone accessed classified systems without clearance," she said, her eyes scanning the room. Paul shifted in his seat, his watch ticking loudly. Claire's necklace twirled faster in her fingers. Nobody mentioned the email from E. 22, but it hung over the room like a storm cloud. And when the representative left, she took a small, unmarked drive, with her leaving the team to wonder what else Ella had touched. The consequences came fast. Tyler was fired by noon. His Instagram story now, a liability after it went viral for all the wrong reasons. Commenters online tore him apart for mocking someone who turned out to be a hero. Rachel lost her sponsorship with a tech conference after her whiteboard stunt was leaked. Chris was dropped from his management track, his colleagues avoiding him like he carried a curse. Victor was reassigned to a desk job in a satellite office, his scowl deeper than ever. Nobody talked about Ella. Her name felt like a landmine. A week later, Congress held an emergency hearing. The room was packed, cameras flashing. The title on the screen, Black Ops Echo Protocol Leak. Generals sat stone-faced, refusing to answer questions about Echo 22. A senator pressed, "Is she even real?" Only one general, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, spoke. "She's real," he said, "and she chose to disappear, to keep the world quiet." A leaked Black Hawk video surfaced, showing Ella in the co-pilot seat, her voice calm, "Scrub the logs. No pursuit. Falcon reset complete." In a small diner miles away, the TV above the counter played the hearing on mute. A waitress wiping down tables glanced at the screen, then at a customer sitting alone in the corner. It was Ella, her camo jacket folded beside her, her bag on the floor. She sipped her coffee, her eyes on the horizon outside the window. The waitress hesitated, then slid a slice of pie onto her table, no charge. Ella looked up, her fingers brushing the mug, and nodded once, a silent thank you. The diner's radio crackled a news report mentioning a mystery agent, but Ella didn't flinch. She just ate her pie, one slow bite at a time. Somewhere far away, Ella sat on a stone ledge by the sea waves crashing below. Her headset blinked green. "Secure channel confirmed, Commander," she said softly, her eyes on the horizon. Her camo jacket moved in the wind, her bag beside her, untouched. For everyone who's been judged, who's been looked down on for how they look or where they come from, this is for you. Your strength is real. The truth always rises. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.